Hello. So recently I've been thinking about postmodernism a lot, and more specifically, a comment by the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, because Žižek has claimed in the past that President Trump is a postmodern president. And that, of course, I struggled to understand what that meant, because, generally speaking, like, the Donald doesn't have an ideology. The Donald is just obsessed with the Donald. And so it's very weird to me that someone would say, well, he's a postmodern president. But then I saw someone on Reddit sort of explain what Zizek meant, and it made a lot more sense to me. I won't say the person's username because I don't want to put them on blast, but I wanted to read this little bit. Again, this isn't me. This is not me. This is off of Reddit. The traditional boundaries of right and left were that the former were skeptical of human behavior and concerned about meaning, and the latter were optimistic of human behavior and sought to dismantle irrational edifices of meaning. Each and every twist around these positions create a postmodern position. All the Republican presidents prior to Trump dutifully repeated the mantra of family and society. Trump's move is to fully accept the knave position. The knave is the cynic who openly states the truth, a crook who tries to sell admission of his crookedness as honesty, a scoundrel who admits the need for illegitimate repression in order to maintain social stability. He famously stated in the presidential debate that he did indeed avoid, not evade, paying taxes. A traditional conservative would have flummoxed, since it breaks the party line of being a supporter of the law that allows a good society to flourish, but the knave just states their advantage and is proud of it. You'd have to be an idiot to not take advantage. The pure postmodernist is the one who denies even the possibility of the system's truth, that it could not have any meaning, and yet precisely because of that doubles down on trying to achieve it. So that made that made Zizek's comment more intelligible to me. It's the idea that Trump is in some ways undermining the system, or undermining the traditional values associated with our political system. And he's outside the, it's hard to explain this because, he's not anti-establishment, even though everyone wants to claim he's anti-establishment. Well, he's outside the truth, the traditional conceptions of truth. He and his staff. In fact, they're open about their lies. So, like, if you remember back with the group chat leak, accidentally putting people who weren't supposed to be there in a secure group chat about top secret military, a top secret military mission. And they didn't deny that this happened. They didn't even admit to making a mistake. And so this becomes, I think, the way of, it's a kind of subversion, but it's a kind of subversion that is at the end of the day allowing for a greater form of obedience. All right, this all sounds very Hegelian, but like, if they can get you to sign up on the bullshit, then they can trust you. And so they're making it harder and harder to buy into the bullshit because they want to know that whoever's in their corner is in their corner to stay. Whoever's on their team is going to do whatever they say and accept whatever reality they want them to accept, no matter, especially because of how hard it is to accept it. Right? So I think this is why people bring up things like post-truth politics, and how, like, if you don't share reality, it's hard to organize a society. But my main reason for bringing this up is I just wanted to talk a little bit about postmodernism in general, because I feel like I have a very interesting relationship to postmodernism. I mean, it's not super original, I don't think, but it is also in some ways Hegelian, I suppose, because, like, on the one hand, I think I've accepted postmodernism, or at least a good chunk of it. I've accepted that there's no completely objective standpoint by which we can examine things. Think like there's science is socially situated, philosophy is socially situated, politics, every human activity is socially situated with a specific point of view and a specific slant. And that the idea of capital T truth might be, at best, it's just unattainable. At worst, it's a kind of illusion that is actually impossible. So more or less, I don't dissent from that general perspective, I suppose. Because I think most of us, I mean, we are the children of postmodernism, and we'll see, maybe what comes after. But I think we've all kind of just accepted this at this point. I think people are much quicker than they used to be to question certain grand truth claims, to question and to be skeptical and ironic and cynical. Again, we live in a skeptical and cynical and ironic age, i.e. the internet. But I was watching this video. It was by this YouTuber, if I can find it. Yeah, it was by the YouTuber Will Schroeder. David Foster Wallace, The Problem with Irony. Again, that was Will Schroeder. But I think it's a really interesting video, and I recommend you go watch it. And he brings up an interesting point, which is, and I think this was David Foster Wallace's point originally. There isn't really a redeeming aspect to irony. We can, I don't know, you look at a piece of media like Family Guy or something, where, like, more or less nothing is taken seriously and everyone's a bad person, right? Like, it's just a wacky world, people doing wacky things, and there are no sacred cows. You will notice what some people say about Family Guy is that it's just too hollow. I mean, this is probably true more of the later seasons than the early ones, but there's a kind of emptiness to it. There's a kind of there's not a lot of meat on the bones in a way, because, again, it's just wacky people doing wacky things, and there's not really a solution to that. There's not really any redemption from that. There's not really there's not really anything that offsets sort of the mean-spiritedness or the cynicism. It is just cynicism and mean-spiritedness all the way down, which is a way to live. That is a way to live. I'm not sure it's a particularly happy way to live, though. In some ways, it strikes me as a rather, it can morph into a kind of toxic mindset. You know, the edgy teenager, nothing matters, man. Like, stereotype that people like to make fun of. And so as this relates to postmodernism, what I wonder is, how do we retain certain truths, certain lessons of postmodernism, but still return to a kind of seriousness and sincerity that on top of our irony and our cynicism, and that ought to be, that can be our saving grace to some extent. Because like, it's one thing to have a slightly detached perspective on things. It's another thing to not believe in anything. It's another thing to never be serious. Because, well, believing in things is very human. Being serious is very human. And so if we're just ironic all the time, then we're missing a portion of what it means to be human. And we're missing certain goals that I think are still goals from perhaps like a time, appealing to Enlightenment values, say. Certain goals that are still like valuable in certain respects. But we might have to be a bit more humble when pursuing them, or pursue them in a different way. Because like, I still consider myself, I mean, it sounds pretentious, but I still consider myself a child of the Enlightenment. I still think of myself as retaining in some way certain Enlightenment values of tolerance and the scientific method, and a suspicion of arbitrary institutions and anything too metaphysical or supernatural. I still retain those values, and I don't think those values are. I don't think we can get rid of those values without some dire consequences. And so maybe the solution is what some people call meta-modernism, or postmodernism. I'm not well read in this stuff a lot, or I'm not well read in like meta-modernism or postmodernism, and I'm not under the impression it's a huge movement right now, or either. But that's where I think like our intellectual journey ought to lead us to. So, for example, you can question grand narratives, but there might be value in like smaller narratives, or there might even be value in a grand narrative if you're aware of, like, perhaps you could retain the grand narrative but still recognize its shortcomings and its flaws. we can be we can be skeptical, right? We can question whether or not we can know anything. But without becoming full on Puritists, we could still aim for something close to the truth. And we can still have debates about what are valuable methodologies and what aren't. And I think that's okay. I think, I mean, it might feel like a weird place to be in, but I think it's to some extent keeping two sets of books. But that's just that's I think the age we live in. I think we live in an age. I keep saying age this, age that, but I think we live in a time when we need to keep two sets of books. So when it comes to politics, I mean, I think it's a moment where, I mean, we shouldn't give up for what we believe in, because some people are. Like you see some Democrats, for example, giving up on trans issues, and I think that's a deadly mistake. Giving up on what we believe in, that's the beginning of the end for American democracy. So I think it is a time when we have to double down on our values, on our beliefs. And when we hear this voice about, well, is that really true? Or I could tell a consistent narrative that says the exact opposite. We just have to accept that, well, we could be wrong. We can be wrong about certain things. We can be humble. We can recognize that success is not, it should not be taken for granted. It's not guaranteed. It never is. But that doesn't mean we should give up fighting for what we believe in. And that doesn't mean we should stop believing in things. It just means believing in things without falling into dogmatism, or without feeling like you have untouchable truth that will eternal untouchable truth. And so anyway, I mean, that's my perspective. I don't know if anyone else, if people feel like I'm not giving postmodernism its just due, or if people feel like I'm being too kind on postmodernism, because conservatives will, take shots at postmodernism in the academy, which is probably another reason why when Zizek's like, oh, Trump's a postmodern president, I'm like, what? Conservatives hate postmodernism generally. But I don't see postmodernism as this evil thing that's undermining Western civilization. I mean, if it is undermining Western civilization, I mean, it's already been in the air for decades now, so it's already exerted its influence. So even if it is a bad influence on the world, it's already exerted it. It's too late. We can't go back. But yeah, I don't think postmodernism in and of itself has been a bad influence. I think like a lot of perspectives or worldviews or ideologies, there does come a point when it gives you diminishing returns. And so I think we can, like I said, I think we can retain certain important ideas from postmodernism while perhaps rehabilitating or resalvaging aspects of modernism and the Enlightenment in order to form a new perspective on things, and in order to fight for a world that we believe in. Anyway, I guess I'll let it. I'll end it there. So thank you for listening, and let me know what your opinions are on postmodernism and my argument in the comments.